Hi and welcome to the Austrian Grand Prix edition of the Motorsport Show. Stuart Codling, Executive Editor of the Motorsport Group, joins me in the studio to celebrate Max Verstappen's first win of the year. We look also at tech developments with our 3D animations. And as we look ahead also to this weekend's British Grand Prix at Silverstone, we meet a driver who won both the Austrian and British Grand Prix in an era when both circuits were very different in layout, but were inexorably the same in terms of essence. Before we start though, have a look at this. A new long circuit record on the old Nürburgring big circuit of 5 minutes, 19.55 seconds, set by Timo Bernhard in a Porsche 919 Hybrid Evo. The car wouldn't even fit properly into the famous carousel. It was staggeringly quick through the daunting Wipperman section leading to Flanskapen. And it reached a top speed, wait for it, of 229.3 miles an hour or 369 kilometers an hour. Anyway, now let's have a look at the Austrian Grand Prix with Stuart Codling. Right, Codders, big weekend for Red Bull. Their home circuit, Max Verstappen, the driver, and a great win.
Marvellous win for him, and it's laid to rest a few of the ghosts from earlier on this season. And it was pretty much a perfect weekend for him. He qualified brilliantly. He made the best of the opening lap. And to me, what was magnificent about that opening lap was he showed the right mixture of circumspection and aggression. He was circumspect at turn one. He let the people ahead of him battle it out. He didn't stick his nose where it shouldn't be. So he survived that. He survived a little bit of a moment at turn three where the Kimster decided he was going to drive off the track and then drive back on at maximum velocity. the devil take the consequences. And then he just nailed Kimi at turn seven, boom, gave him a little tap. And that really set up his victory when Mercedes threw it in the dumpster.
Going back, though, to qualifying, team orders became a bit of a talking point as a result of what happened there. And then in the race, that projected through to what we saw at Force India and also, to some extent, what could have happened at Ferrari at the end. So team orders, ironically, coming back into the frame at the circuit in which the whole thing began in the first place. But what did you make of all that argy-bargy in qualifying between Daniel and Max?
It was a very peculiar situation because when you first saw it occurring, it was very difficult to understand what was going on. And then you heard the chafing and moaning and, it's his turn to be in front of me. No, it's my turn to be in front of him, all that sort of thing. And it does throw a fascinating light on the internal dynamic in these teams. I think basically Ricciardo was completely in the wrong. It was his turn to make the hole in the air. And for whatever reason, he was breaking discipline and decided not to do it. So he was rightly castigated. He's still a little bit of a dig.
But can I just give a suggestion of what I think probably took place behind the scenes, knowing the way F1 teams work, and particularly Red Bull? Probably at some point before qualifying, Daniel said to his race engineer or an engineer of importance, I need to have one run when I can at least get a tow around here, otherwise it's a joke. And the engineer probably would have said, yeah, good point, we'll talk about that. And then Daniel probably thought, well, that's all going to happen. And then the engineer probably went to the hierarchy and said, what do you think about this? And the hierarchy either said, difficult problem, let's not deal with it now, or they probably said, no, it's not going to happen. Either way, the message probably didn't get back to Daniel. This is the point, communication within the team. And that's always been slightly edgy at Red Bull, under the heading of Christian Horner's thing, let them race, but they can't touch one another. I still want to see how that is going to manifest itself if they both go into the World Championship in the final round with a chance to win, and the order is race one another, but don't hit one another. Yeah, right. That's where the whole thing stems from, I think, that sort of basic belief.
What's he going to do? Send Dietrich Mateschitz in and do a big Monty Python hand down onto the circuit?
For those of you who don't know Monty Python, it's Nicky Lauder's favourite show on TV, or used to be anyway, when dear Alan Henry was alive. Motoring News interview from about 1971, Nicky saying, yeah, the only thing I come to England for is Monty Python, yeah. Anyway.
Extraordinary. the Spanish Inquisition, very funny.
Thank you, Connors, for that one. Let's move just before we get rid of, before we finish with Max, let's just talk about the other team order situations that were going on. What did you make of Force India saying to Esteban Ocon, let Sergio pass, see if he can have a go at Kevin Magnussen. If not, you can have the position at the end of the race. What do you think of all that?
It's the newfound spirit of cooperation in that team now that they've been threatened with having money taken away.
It's complicated, isn't it? You know, that is quite a serious use of team orders, I think, isn't it?
For me, what teed that situation up was that when the virtual safety car was going down, Force India didn't feel confident enough to double stack the drivers. So Perez ended up on a more difficult strategy that kind of put him at a bit less of an advantage than Ocon.
Yeah, but
so
that's not Ocon's fault, is it? You know.
Maybe they just felt obliged and they just felt he should be allowed through to have
maybe
a go.
they felt after everything that's happened between those two, let's try and do something that the team really, you know, have it their way. And it kind of worked. And Checo wasn't too happy at the end of the race, but nonetheless, you know, why would he be happy? Anyway, moving on to Ferrari and the team orders they didn't apply at the end. Well, that was good.
I was actually fascinated to see that because I was waiting for the call to come. As you said, Austria, it wouldn't be the first time we've seen the Ferrari pit wall order their drivers to swap places. And I kind of would have thought they would have done. On the other hand, with Lewis gone, they maybe thought actually there's a bit less of a pressing reason.
Perversely, though, I think that was actually quite bad news for Kimi because if Kimi was in the frame to drive for them in 2019, I think they would have thought, he's our driver, we'll make him slow down and Seb can have the points. But the fact they didn't do that suggests that they're saying, well, he's not going to be with us next year, we'll let him finish P2, and have a nice day, Kimi. To me, in the long run, that probably doesn't spell great news for Kimi Räikkönen. But as we've been saying for a long time, we think Charles Leclerc is going to be in that car. And the amazing thing about Mercedes is it's the first mechanical retirement for two cars in the same race since, I'm sure you know this one, Cotters.
Off the top of my head, Monza 1955.
55. When you were how old?
About minus 18.
Well, there you go. You know, it's very impressive. I mean, in one way, you can say, isn't it impressive? And then Lewis' run of 33 points finishes comes to an end. Interesting that they, again, for the second race, decided to go to the slightly more conservative tyre for Q2, thinking long-term, conservative choice. We've got a quick car here. Let's run with the super soft rather than the ultra soft, as indeed did Red Bull. But in a way, that kind of ruined their race because had they been on the ultra soft, there probably wouldn't have been any hesitation about bringing Lewis in at the first safety car. So it's interesting how Mercedes are trying to, being in front, leading a championship, having won championships, a very difficult thing to sustain that. And these are all the issues. When you're behind, you can take the risk, but when you're at the front, Mercedes have to try and be conservative, but not too conservative, and they're second guessing themselves most of the time.
Yeah. You've put your finger right on it there by mentioning risk, and I think Mercedes have become quite risk averse because, well, why would you want to embrace risky strategies when for 4 seasons you've had the best car, you've always had a little bit in your pocket, it's up to the people behind to take the risks.
And that came to its head when the virtual safety car came out, and both Red Bulls were straight in going to soft tyres with a stack stop, a beautiful stack stop. We should give them massive credit for that. And Mercedes wondering whether they should keep him out for a lap longer, and that was the difference. That was the moment the race was lost. Beyond that, when Lewis says things like, so am I P4 now? Have I got to pass these guys in front? It almost makes you think, why aren't the drivers getting involved or being allowed to get more involved with the strategy? Because quite often you hear Lewis saying, why are we doing this? What's happening? And it's as if he's been left out of all the different permutations that's going on. Now, maybe that's because he's not around or doesn't want to be involved in all those meetings that go on beforehand. But all the things we're talking about are innate racing blood decisions that most racers feel, as distinct from committee-operated, slightly removed decisions behind the laptop, not actually seeing and smelling the racing. And that's one of the other things that I often think when I look at Mercedes these days. How much role do the real racers actually play in what's going on? Romain Grosjean seems to be getting into a pattern now. Horrendous race. I've got to pick myself up here. And then driving beautifully. And he did that in Austria, as indeed, of course, did his teammate at Haas, Kevin Magnussen. Great result for the team, particularly for Romain, though, after everything that's been going on recently for him. Beautiful drive. If he's got the credits here and the debits there, where is he now in your mind, Cotters?
Blimey, Formula One double entry bookkeeping. I think it was a very strange race because it was almost unobtrusively brilliant, wasn't it? You only really saw him when he was whining on the radio in the Grosjean style about drivers ahead. not obeying blue flags.
All credit to Craig Scarborough, though, because he did point out a couple of weeks ago how much work Haas have been doing recently and how constant their development is on the car. So all credit to them for that. But much more importantly, where are you at in terms of adopting some of the recipes from Grosjean's cooking book and serving them to your loved ones?
I'm quite some distance away from that because having read his book, I do take issue with some of his methodologies. For instance, one of the recipes is fish cooked on papillote, which, as any fool knows, means a brown paper parcel. He does it in foil. So one of these days I'm going to take him up on that.
And Fernando Alonso, excellent drive from the pit lane. Sounds wonderful when you say that. Why was he in the pit lane, though? Because he damaged sufficient number of front wings to start with a non-Parc Fermé approved front wing and therefore had to be in the pit lane. Fernando, if he hadn't damaged so many front wings, he could have beaten the Haas's.
But he did manage his tyres brilliantly. And
he did.
What was interesting was the way Leclerc said, after Alonso went past him, he, Charles, learned a lot from watching the way Alonso was managing his tyres, and it was almost like a masterclass in time management. He then had to allow Ericsson pass to have a go, which didn't work.
Last week, Craig Scarborough very appropriately brought us up to date with recent developments at Red Bull, but now let's have a look at the changes to the Mercedes W09s this weekend. Lots of talk about Mercedes all weekend, how quick they were, how neither of them finished, and also in the pit lane, what was going on with their side pods. Now, they've obviously had a look at what's been going on at Ferrari, Red Bull, Haas, and oddly at Williams, where over the winter they raised the pods, which actually is a big job in terms of the chassis because you've got the internal structure there with the beams, the crash beams. And to raise those is a big job. It's a redesign. But in doing that, it gives you much more room under the side pod to get the air flowing towards the diffuser. Now, Mercedes didn't do that. They've got the lower impact spars, if you like. So they've come to a compromise. And the compromise is what we saw in Austria, where you see the cutaway side pods now and more horizontal surfaces, a bit like the Red Bull in the Red Bull idiom. So a compromise here. The question is, of course, do you think that Mercedes now will go one step further and do the higher crash beams, maybe a B version, before the end of this year?
It's a fundamentally difficult part of the car to re-engineer, both in terms of the cost, but also the engineering resource you have to throw at it, because axiomatically it does involve re-engineering the crash structure and getting it homologated. So I'm not sure they'll actually do that. I'm sure they'll have kicked themselves when they saw how effective it was for the other teams.
Well, and obviously it's kind of working because the car was really quick in Austria, as we saw. Maybe too quick in some areas, given the amount of tyre wear they had. But if that isn't enough, they've also gone to the twin mounts for the mirrors, Red Bull style. They wouldn't like me saying that. And if we look at the rear wing end plates, we can see the vertical slots, sort of McLaren style as well. So Mercedes certainly not too proud to be looking up and down the pit lane at what's been going on. Picture the scene some 44 years ago in the little town of Zeltweg, home since 1964 of the Austrian Grand Prix. Dark storm clouds gather again over the mountains. The ultra-quick circuit is still greasy slick from morning rain, yet everyone is lining up on dry tyres. James Hunt is on the pole for McLaren. Also on the front row, the very fast, neat and precise John Watson at the wheel of the Jeff Ferris-designed Penske PC4. Ahead, the infamous long right-hander, flat out in top gear, even with cold tyres and a full load of fuel. Exactly a year before, the Penske team had lost their star driver, Mark Donoghue, on exactly this corner. For Watson, an integral part of Penske's rebirth, this was a moment etched in time.
I mean, it was a difficult moment for everybody in the grid because we all had the same issue to contend with. I suppose by being at the front of the grid and getting into the Helleninkte, I think it was the Helleninkte corner.
Well, Helleninkte was the top of the hill, but then the right-hander after that didn't really have a name. It was just the quick
It was a quick, it was a flat-out corner,
Yeah.
and in those conditions, and we didn't have the benefit of tyre warmers, and we would have only had an outlap. So there's a modicum of temperature in the tyre. So I think the cautious approach, albeit that you're at the front of a grid, but everybody would have had the same view. And we all got through it, I think. But because the track was patchier in places, not every bit was wet or semi-wet, semi-dry. So the first there would catch whatever was the condition and either would benefit or lose out of it. So in the early laps of the race, the lead changed quite a number of times.
Yeah.
I don't know why, maybe just some people felt better prepared.
Well,
better
can I
equipped
suggest,
for it.
you were in front, but because you're in front, you don't actually know what's ahead of you, whereas you're behind, as Ronnie and Jody were, it was slightly easier to judge their pace and what you were doing.
Yes,
and
indeed.
You were, in a way, you were a marked man at that point.
Well, I was the pathfinder,
Yeah.
I mean, for want of another phrase or word. So, I mean, as I mentioned, over the next number of laps, the lead rotated amongst 4 or 5 of us. And then gradually the track dried out, and inevitably, as history has it, I managed to get into the lead and consolidated the lead and took the checkered flag.
Just a very short phrase there, but it actually sums up a multitude of different things that were going on, because to get the lead, you not only had to pass Jody Scheckter in the six-wheeled Tyrrell, which you did relatively, I think, coming out of the last corner from memory, but Ronnie was something else, because Ronnie was always going to be good regardless of the conditions. And you got him, I think, going into that downhill left-hander, and you had to go offline to do it. But I remember talking to you after the race, and you said, I knew I could do it because I passed him there in testing the week before.
I mean, I don't remember precisely which driver in which corner I would have made those passes.
It was a spooky place to pass Ronnie Peterson.
Well, and Ronnie, I mean, I suppose every driver at that day was at a very high level. Ronnie was always one of the highest of those, and particularly in difficult conditions. I don't know why on that particular day I seemed to have the blessing of somebody. And I was able to pass Ronnie, and I had to pass James, and had to deal with others on the circuit as well.
The other thing from that race, of course, was you deciding afterwards to shave your beard off. Whether you decided that on the slowdown lap, or whether you'd said to yourself 3 years previously, I will shave it off if I win a Grand Prix.
The foundation for the beard being removed was principally during the discussions with Roger about driving for him in 1975, the end of 75, and then for the 76 season, and one assumed for the remaining seasons, was that I knew that Roger was no big fan of facial hair. And in fact, any hair that was longer than a Marine in the US military would have been not really the norm. Roger never asked, would I shave the beard? But I'd had it for a number of years, and I was feeling it's about time, maybe I should take the beard off. But to do it at the point of signing a contract with Roger, maybe people would have assumed that I'd been told to shave it. So in terms, it wasn't so much a case of losing a beard, it might have been a case of losing face. So I said in the contract, in the discussions, I said, Roger, when we win a Grand Prix, I will shave my beard. I will give you that undertaking. So it means that I don't have a loss of face. You don't have to ask me. It gives both of us motivation.
Just a loss of facial hair.
Loss of facial hair. So none of us loses anything, and we all gain out of it. And simply, that evening, we flew back to London, and Roger was flying out on Monday morning back to the States. So we stayed at an airport hotel, going to meet in the morning for a breakfast meeting, and then Roger would be on his way. I went up to my room, unpacked, went into the bathroom, took out a pair of scissors because it needed to be trimmed before it could be shaved, and then shaved the beard that evening. I did it literally as soon as I arrived in the hotel bedroom. I came down the following morning into the coffee shop, and I was down before Roger and Heinz Hofer, the team manager of the team. They came down together. And I remember sitting there and looking around and seeing Roger and Heinz. And I remember Roger's voice saying to Heinz, "Where's Watson? Where's Watson?" And I sat and sort of didn't look at them directly, but looked slightly away and said, "Over here, Roger, over here." Because they knew the voice, but they couldn't see me. And I stood up or something. And then, of course, the penny dropped, and they realized that they had got a clean-shaven Grand Prix driver at last.
5 years later, John became a British hero by memorably winning his home Grand Prix at Silverstone in the carbon chassis McLaren MP41, and he did so after avoiding a multi-car accident at the very fast Woodcote chicane, triggered by Ferrari Gilles Villeneuve.
The most important thing is to not look at the car directly ahead of you, but look through the corner. I saw the Ferrari going bump, bump, bump one way, then bump, bump the other way, and eventually a big cloud of blue smoke. So I was forewarned or forearmed to be prepared to brake heavily if I needed to, or to take avoiding action or whatever.
Which you did very well. Late in the race, René Arnoux' engine started to go off song, and you were catching him second and a half, 2 seconds a lap. But again, I remember you saying afterwards, it was very tempting at the time for you to start pressing on and really start to feel the win was there. But again, you had to just tell yourself, you're catching him, he's in trouble, just take it one corner at a time, look after the tyres, don't do anything stupid. I remember you saying that afterwards.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that René Arnoux never forgiven me for winning that race. And the last time I saw him, I think it was at Monaco earlier this year, and he still rants on that I would have won that race. I can't do a French accent. I would have won that race only because my car broke. It wasn't, Give it a rest, for goodness sake.
But it did break, Rennie.
37 years ago. I mean, talk about it. I mean, I think as the race progressed and they saw that I was making progress through the field, that there was a possibility, not that I was going to win an outright pace, but I might come first. There's a difference between winning and coming first. And when Anu then began to struggle and then I took the lead, around the circuit I became aware that there was an excitement which I'd never experienced personally and had seen briefly maybe with James in 76 at Brands Hatch. And the race then concluded, checkered flag, did a lap of honour with Jacques Lafitte in the back of a flatbed truck, came out of Copse Corner driving up towards Beckett's, and the circuit was covered in people. And I turned to Jacques and said, what the hell is going on? And he turned around and said very eloquently, this is for you. You have given them a special day, and this is their way of saying thank you. And one of the things that I've enjoyed in those 37 years since that success is, in particular when I've been at Silverstone, but could be anywhere, grown-ups who may have been youngsters, maybe teenagers on that day, I've walked up and said, I just wanted to say I was at Silverstone and thank you for a great day, which is maybe more of a pleasure than the outright win itself.
The very eloquent and the very self-effacing John Watson. Now let's have a look at today's Silverstone lap. The flow and the rhythm are diminished. Some great sections of road, however, remain. Silverstone, scene of the first ever World Championship Formula One Grand Prix, 1950, won by Giuseppe Farina, 100,000 spectators. King George was present. Who would ever forget that? It was actually in action before that race. It is an airfield circuit. It saw service during World War II. Today, it is subject to all the variables that come with airfields. Very open, very flat, even though the elevation here looks to be reasonable around the Beckett's area. When you're there at Silverstone, all seems very low to the ground, as you would expect. A lot of changes to the track over the years, not the least of which is the building of the new wing, which is just by the Turn 1 complex there. Not my favourite part of the circuit. Indeed, if you do go to Silverstone, try to go to the old pits right up at the top of the circuit where the F2 and GP3 paddocks are. Great atmosphere there. Not too many spectators, oddly, seem to find their way there. Anyway, going through the corners now, Turn 1 is a quick corner, a right-hander that's almost flat, probably flat in qualifying. Going to be a very spectacular corner for the Formula One cars this year, 2018. One is impressive, there's a kink after that, and then hard braking for 3 and 4. The back straight, this is a DRS zone. Down towards the complex, turn 6, 7. Turn 7 is an area where you will see Sebastian Vettel doing his patented straight line V cornering. Shows up a lot here. Lewis even mentioned it when I was doing a lap with him last year in a Mercedes, high-powered Mercedes road car. He said, this is where Seb does this. And indeed, he does brake in a straight line, goes to a slow mid-corner rotation point, which is the apex of the V, and then a straight line exit. Most of the other drivers, and particularly Lewis and Max Verstappen, will be turning in relatively early on the brakes, getting the nose to work, given by the amount of brake pedal release there, giving the brake pedal pressure, and of course trying to tease the throttle on as soon as possible. Turn 8 is a flat-out kink, but then we approach Turn 9, or to you and I, Copse Corner. One of the great corners in Formula One, very, very fast. The radius has been changed over the years, but still, if you stand on the outside of Copse, in the spectator area, dead in line with the turn-in point, you will see big differences between one driver and another, particularly even within the same team, between Daniel and Max Verstappen, between Lewis and Valtteri. And most noticeably, you'll see Fernando Alonso with his flick as he goes into the corner, and you'll see Lewis Hamilton just beautifully, seamlessly getting his Mercedes into Copse. Great place to watch. Accelerating out of there, flat out, another flat out kink, Maggot's curve, they might like to call it turn 10 these days, and then into the Beckett's complex. There isn't really a Formula One driver or F2 or GP3 driver who won't say this is one of the great parts of any circuit in the world. Very fast entry. You go down a gear in the middle of the Beckett's complex, but you've got to be thinking of the exit almost as you turn in, as Carlos Reutemann used to say so memorably. Another DRS zone going into Stowe Corner, turn 15, and that, of course, is where Nigel Mansell passed Nelson Piquet in 1987 to go on to win the British Grand Prix that year. It was a double dummy. Nigel described it in the long interview we did with him recently. You can see that online, on demand, don't miss it. Goes into it in a lot of detail. One of the great passes in the history of Formula One. And the crowd at Silverstone really is what this race is all about. Look at what Lewis Hamilton has received when he's won races in the recent past. Nigel Mansell before that, and John Watson, who we have in this show, experienced it for the first time in 1981 when he won. David Coulthard, another British favourite. Lots of atmosphere always at Silverstone. The British crowd really embraced their Formula One and their Formula 2 and their GP3. And if you're at Silverstone this weekend on Thursday night, don't miss us at the Whittlebury Hall Pavilion, the F1 Racing Fan Village, doing a live Q&A with some special guests and some prizes. Don't miss it. That's all for this week's show. See you next week as we look back at the British Grand Prix.